For more, let's turn to our CBSN legal analyst, Rebecca Roiphe. Hi there, Rebecca. So how does Justice Ginsburg's passing affect current cases on the docket?
So I think her passing is going to have both a short-term and a long-term effect. So in terms of its immediate effect on the docket, it's significant because in order to issue an opinion, there have to be 5 justices who agree on a certain point. And previously, there were a lot of 5-4 splits, with the liberal justices convincing one conservative, usually Chief Justice Roberts, to come to their side. And the problem now is they will have to be able to convince 2 justices in order to issue an opinion. That seems on this particular court unlikely. And even to just agree to review a case, there needs to be 4 justices. So the 3 liberal justices would have to be able to convince one conservative just to be able to hear a case. So that will have a significant effect, both in the short term, and then if there is another conservative justice confirmed, then that balance will alter going forward. And that will change, I think, several significant issues in the long run.
So in the short term, are we looking at a greater potential for tie decisions until a new justice is seated? And what exactly would that mean for those particular cases?
Yes, there's a much greater potential for tie decisions, and that's significant. What happens when there's a tie is that the lower court decision stands. So whatever circuit court had issued the opinion that's being reviewed, that will be the law. But of course, then there is no rule nationally. There's no Supreme Court decision that establishes the law in this particular area. So it leaves uncertainty and a kind of instability in that, you would have a particular precedent in a particular jurisdiction, but it might not carry over to others. And that could create, problems in terms of national coordination, depending on what the issue is.
I know it's impossible to predict what's going to happen here, but if the November election results require a Supreme Court ruling, as they did in 2000, how could this court vacancy that exists at this moment impact the election results?
Yeah, I mean, it could impact it in a huge way. I think there are all sorts of ways in which the Supreme Court doesn't rule according to ideological lines. And particularly Justice Roberts has been good about thinking about these issues in a principled way and issuing a decision, sometimes with the conservatives, sometimes not. But, as we all know from Bush versus Gore, when it comes down to it, very frequently there is this kind of ideological split. So if there is an issue with this election and it's raised to the Supreme Court level, you could have a situation in which either all of the conservatives rule one way against the 3 liberal-leaning justices, or Justice Roberts or one of the others flips over, and then you have 4-4 situation. Now, if there is a tie, again, it leaves the lower court decision in place. So if this, is like with Bush v. Gore, it was Florida. It could be a different state. If that state has made a particular determination, if that's the ruling, then that would remain. And I think that would have significant consequences for the legitimacy of the next president, of the presidency ongoing. And given that we're in such a charged moment right now, in which both sides really have leveled questions about the other in terms of the legitimacy of this election, it seems particularly unfortunate right now that we might end up with a situation in which this election review ends up in a Supreme Court that's in flux.
So, Rebecca, remind us, what are some of the big cases the Supreme Court is expected to hear arguments on before the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is the Affordable Care Act. The fate of the Affordable Care Act is being heard in November. And so, that I think a lot of people have had their eye on that case, and this significantly affects the chances, in part because it's possible that Chief Justice Roberts might, in fact, rule with the liberal justices to uphold different parts of the Affordable Care Act, despite the questions about the repeal of the individual mandate. It's possible that that would happen. But even still, then we would have, of course, a 4-4 split, or if there is another justice confirmed by that point, which is highly unlikely, then, of course, the conservatives would win regardless of whether or not Justice Roberts kind of jumps over the aisle and rules with the liberals in that particular regard. So that's a big case. But you know what? There are lots of other ones. And one thing to keep our eye on, I think, are all these emergency orders. So they don't get as much attention, but the question about how much power governments have to regulate, interfere with, business as usual for coronavirus reasons, that's going up. Various different election questions before the election might go up for emergency interim orders. And all of those things are somewhat in question now that the makeup of the Supreme Court is not certain.
Yeah, it's a really good point, something I hadn't thought about. You touched on this a moment ago, but Rebecca, more broadly, talk to us about the implications here behind appointing the next justice. What might the selection mean when it comes to case law in the United States of America?
Yeah, so, I think everybody is focusing on abortion, as well they should. Clearly, both of the two top frontrunners have expressed and probably will rule against abortion rights to the extent, I don't know whether they'll overrule Roe versus Wade, but will either or chip away at the protections that Roe v. Wade offered. And that's obviously a big issue and on the top of a lot of people's minds right now. But I think there's another issue that people don't pay as much attention to because it's kind of dry and boring, but has really significant implications, which is the nature of federal power. And so this is something that the conservatives really disagree with the liberals on. And if a Supreme Court ends up moving right, then you could have a Supreme Court that invalidates a lot of the legislative agenda of Democrats going forward. So even if the Democrats sweep the election, let's say, in November, and they try to put forth a legislative agenda that would further their interests, you could see a Supreme Court that has a vision of federal power that's kind of like pre-New Deal. So invalidating the administrative state, not viewing Congress's power to legislate very, very narrowly. And if that happens, then that has long-term implications for, the nature of our country in a way that it's almost hard to predict, but I think could be even more significant than abortion, which seems so obviously on people's mind right now.
Oh, but it's a really important point. All right, Rebecca Roiphe. Rebecca, always good to have you. Thank you.
Nice being with you.